His Majesty the Worm, by Josh McCrowell, is your not-so-typical megadungeon crawling tabletop RPG. There is a city, there's a hole beneath the city, an underworld. It is said that there's a dragon of frightful proportions dwells within the underworld, and he is called His Majesty the Worm. None has seen it and returned to tell of it, but somebody, something, has to be within the center of the great maze. Or you could just not care and make lots of money. That's right, this is Dungeon Meshi the ttrpg. In His Majesty the Worm, throw your d6 off the table because you won't be using any dices. Instead, you will be using a deck of tarot cards, or to be more precise, the Rider-Waite tarot deck with 78 cards, the standard tarot deck that exists everywhere these days, I think. The GM will be taking the major arcana portion of the deck, which has 21 cards, like the Hierophant, the Chariot, the Magician, the Star, and of course. However, the Fool is thrown into the player's deck instead along with all 56 of the minor arcana, which is consisted of 4 suits of 14 cards. The suits include wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, each assigns to an attribute. Swords represent strength and weapon skill, pentacles represent swiftness and slyness, cups represent wisdom and training, and wands represents willpower and charisma. Your own character has a base stat of 4 3 2 1, each assigned to an attribute. When you have to perform a test as requested by the GM, you take a card and plus that number to your relevant attribute. If it's equal to 14 and over, you succeed. If you also get the right suit, it's now a great success. If you fail the test, you can still push your fate and draw another card. This will only give you success if you passed, no great success, but if you still fail here, you will get a great failure, and that's really bad. Both great success and failure basically adds more to the situation, and obviously, it's one thing to fail, it's another to fail so hard you get more troubles. What if you pull the Fool? Well, the Fool has a value of 0, but you can still push your luck if it's your first draw. However, if you get the Fool when pushing your fate, you are completely screwed no matter what. This just feels very funny to me. Obviously, in other games, if you get a bad roll, you will feel bad, but when you pull a card that basically said there's an extra layer of funniness to it. If you don't have a tarot deck, you can use other more common substitute too. The percentage chance won't be 1 to 1, but it will be close. Anyway, let's talk about making a character. Much like a lot of old school RPG, you start by setting up your origin, what kith and kin your character is from, and one of the 4 paths you have chosen, which decides which of the attribute you put a 4 in. And then the steps start going off in a more whimsical direction, as you then select the numbers for your other 3 attributes based on what your adventurer used to struggled with when young, what kind of failed career you have before, and what your first adventure into the underworld is like that turns you into the full-blown weirdo today, all of which also gives your adventurers a motif each that might aid you one day. I like this. Often when a ttrpg tells you to make a character, it sometimes feels like you are listing off numbers instead of actually making a person. This is just a couple wording changes and then some, but it does make me feel like I'm writing an actual character with background and stuff, and makes me want to put more effort into it. Another thing that's real funny to me when making a character is when you make a guild with the rest of the party, and you have to decide the looting rights to split the loot properly between everyone. This is totally going to set off a massive discussion between the players on who has the hardest role or who is the more important one and so on just to get more loot, something a bunch of adventurers going dungeon diving would totally do. When setting up the guild, you also get to decide what bond is between you and other adventurers in the party, and by role-playing well as according to the bond, you can charge it up and later burn it to heal a wound, cure an affliction, or gain back resolve when camping, and oftentimes, these are the only ways you can do it, so maintaining your bonds with others and actually role-playing as an adventurer instead of treating everything like a number is integral to your survival too. There's going to be many examples of mechanic that reinforce how you role-play as an adventurer in His Majesty the Worm a lot. I'm really surprised by how well the book does this. It's pretty good at it. Moving back a bit, you also get 2 mastered talents that you don't need to spend EXP with to use, one from your chosen kin, one from your path. There are 4 kiths, humans, you know who they are, Fae, the immortal spirit, and sometimes very old children, underfolk, the dwarves, halflings, and trolls, and orcs, honor-driven pillagers that literally worships RNG, each further separated into various kins. The kin talent you get from your origin further exemplify how each kin is like. Humans are generic as hell, so they get one that's the most flexible. Fae being originally spirits of the far realm means they just know more about stuff than anyone else. Underfolks can get through most situations and troubles from sheer stubbornness, and the orcs love fighting, so all their talents only trigger when they get wounded. powerful, but very likely to get you killed. Your adventurer can also get a rate talent, powerful talent that further reinforces what kin your character is, as you can only get them by performing 3 tasks that exemplify the platonic ideal of your kin, meaning, the game itself is making you roleplay as whoever your adventurer is better, by danging a reward in your face. You don't really need to get it, but it's basically free estate, and there's a lot of tips on understanding what each kin is really like. When it comes to talents from your path, you only get 1 mastered from the start, the rest is considered as in training, meaning you have to spend a single EXP when using these in training or non-mastered talent, but after spending 7 EXP on one of these talents, they are considered to be mastered. This is actually quite a neat concept. You effectively have a full deck of talent to use rather than slowly unlocking them one by one, but for the most part, you still need to spend a resource to use most of them until your adventurer finally mastered them. This still lets you focus on getting specific talents, but when the situation calls for it, you have other rarely used ways to deal with it if you wish to. And of course, you can totally learn talents from other paths from other character, just to make your adventurer even more flexible in various circumstances. Anyway, let's talk about the paths. Paths of Swords is what you could expect from the name. You get really good at killing things with this path. Paths of Pentacles is the sneaky path. You are good at conning people, fighting dirty, running away, and hiding either you or things in places nobody expect. Paths of Cups are for those who are smarter than most other people, a support class in a way. You can command animal companion, heal people with medical knowledge, just knows more about the dungeon than anyone else, which is very important because half the threats you face in the dungeon is not the monsters but the dungeon itself, making someone who sucks at combat but good at navigating the dungeon extremely important. Also, you can make potions and bombs and oils out of monsters part via alchemy. As someone who is an extreme kleptomaniac in video game who enjoys looting everything including organs from monsters, this talent connects to me on a spiritual level. And then there's Paths of Wands. To all sickos and power-hungry gremlins out there, get ready because this is gonna be wild. Paths of Wands, unsurprisingly, is primarily about magic, separated into wastes, weird, wield, and welkin. There's barely any spells that directly do damage, and most gives you a lot of ways to creatively utilize them in and out of a fight. My personal favorite is Portable Hole, which you can use to make a hole in a wall to put your hand through to grab stuff, or even store an entire object inside a wall to pick it up later. All these spells require 2 things, a physical component you need to carry around to cast it, and a resolve spent to cast the spell. Resolve is a resource you can spend to improve your roll or activate some talents. You have 4 of it at max, and recovering it in the underworld can be difficult. Which is why if you want to cast more than 4 spells per dungeon trip, you want to form a pact. A pact is rule you have set upon yourself with the far realm to charge the component for your spell. This can include, forego armor, forego skins or furs of a beast, forego weapons, wands somehow not counted as one, and so on, and suddenly, because you roleplayed as a wizard, you are now a wizard. But also if you are going for maximum spell casting, you will be playing as a disgusting power-hungry creature that have to eat the living, mutilate yourself, cannot tell a lie, and have to be very very quiet. So maybe not going full wizard mode is a good idea. Thankfully, you only need to keep the pact up until you have cast the spell, then you have to make the pact again while camping, so you can just be a normal person above the dungeon and an absolute nutcase beneath the surface. But also if you break the pact, or get any of these above happen to you, things will go horribly wrong, as casting complex spells in His Majesty the Worm is like fucking around with the demon core. Malefinance is basically 2 pages worth of tables that tell you what happens if you or others fuck up a spell. This includes but not limited to, crying tears of blood, all potions on you explodes, causing all sorts of effects, rain fucking indoor, can only say words as if you are having a rap battle with someone, a sick tune appears out of nowhere around you and you can't turn it off, a guild member's firstborn is dead and it's your fault, a new star appears in the sky and a city district get nuked out of existence 3 days later, and you slowly vomits out a parasitic twin pieces by pieces and there's nothing you can do until the whole thing is out. Needless to say, if some of your players are not comfortable with extensive body horror, change things up a bit. It's kind of funny how it just feels like that there's an ongoing conflict in the ttrpg community on who can create the most fucked up magic or psychic power system. Anyway, be really fucking careful when casting spells during a fight. Now, let's dive into the underworld. There are 4 phases in His Majesty the Worm: crawl phase, challenge phase, camp phase, and city phase. Leaving challenge phase aside for a moment because it's interesting but in a different way than others, in crawl, camp, and city phase, the game really wants you to feel like an weirdo adventurer that is barely financially solvent. Before entering the underworld, the game really emphasized that you should fill all 21 of your inventory slot plus more with stuff like torches, candles, spare clothing, bedroll, rations, and more torches, because you will quickly find out that it's not bloody enough. As you enter and travel through the trap-filled and shit is rusty all doors is locked dungeon, the GM will be drawing encounters from the meat grinder, which, despite the name, will only have a quarter of the encounters actually having your party encountering anything. The rest is situation that's neutral or can impede you, taking your resource bit by bit, or just your torch slowly dwindling in the darkness. For the most part, both your bane and boon will be coming from the dungeon rather than the inhabitants. If you can conquer it, you get rich. If you can't, you will fucking starve. And as you are struggling through the dungeon, your torch will slowly burn out, and you won't like it when you are fully out of any light source, so you are on a timer down there too. Having someone on your team that can understand what the dungeon is made for and thus where the riches can be is extremely valuable. Once you are tired from walking around, you can start camp phase and rest, collect yourself, and prepare for the next day. But you better have bedroll and ration, because if you can't sleep well, you are stressed, and if you are hungry, you are stressed, and because you can't heal due to being stressed, you will soon be fucking dead. So preparing your journey into the underworld before you even step in it can be very crucial, and having backup plan is always a good thing. I was honestly just making a joke when I say His Majesty the Worm is just Dungeon Meshi the ttrpg, but this game fits it so well that you barely need to adjust it, just change alchemy with cooking. I also like the sheer amount of guidelines you get when making your own dungeon as the GM, with RNG table to generate part of the dungeons before you clean it up with your own touch. There's also a lot of guideline on making actual good traps players can handle without it being stupid, and creating factions within the underworld that players might be able to converse to, because having to fight everything you see down below can be tedious and eventually boring. It's more fun to have some people or creature you met beneath the surface to be able to talk to you, then you can figure out if you can work with them or you should just stab them. There's also no leveled encounter here. If you encounter a dragon in your first session, you encounter a fucking dragon, either turn the hell around or sneak around it. Not every problem can be solved with violence, not every problem can be solved at all except by running either. Unless your contract demands you to fight something, you absolutely don't need to kill anything at all. Be like an adventurer that just wants to get rich and not an idiot that wants to meet death on first opportunity. You can literally meet death by the way. And when you get more money from successful trip into the underworld, you could live in luxurious establishment and get high quality gears, or even commission for a specialty tool, or just carouse with others in the bar to get more experience. But, to do all that, you have to get to the surface and start the city phase, the most hated phase to all adventurers. As for why, it's simple. The moment you reach the surface you have to pay a 50% tax of all gold you have looted down there. But, even outside of the underworld, nothing is boring about the city phase. There's city event roll that could determine if something interesting has happened on the surface, and the city itself can be randomly generated, creating district you can't find in other campaign to let you take action exclusive to the version of the city you are in. And once you are done drinking and resting, you get another contract, and prepare another trip into the dungeon, until you finally complete your personal quest, whether that's rescuing your sister from a dragon, and etc., then you finally retire, maybe. I know I said this enough already, but this entire loop really just lets people act out their dungeon diving adventurer fantasy, both in and out of the dungeon, even if that fantasy is kinda shit because actual dungeon diving would suck ass. Now, I think I hold off on it long enough already. Let's talk about the challenge phase, a fighting phase, where nobody use a dice. In challenge phase, the players get to take 4 cards out from the minor arcana deck, and place 1 card face down as their initiative, and so do the GM. Initiative determines how fast you go, the lower the number, the better, but it also determines your defense against incoming attacks and other things, in which case the higher the number, the better. The fact that you are given 4 cards with numbers and you already know what the numbers are, make combat in His Majesty the Worm a lot more tactical in scale. You get to decide what your initiative and thus your defense is, and nobody else are allowed to know what your number is either. It's only when the initiative number finally reach you, or an enemy targets you that you flip your initiative card. Also, unlike most other dice-based ttrpg, you can bluff the GM. When you attack or do other action that immediately target enemies, you have to show your card, but if you are, say, preparing to react against other things, like dodging or parrying, you can place a card face down, and nobody would know what card you have. You could have a really shitty card down on the table, and because of your poker face, the GM might just decide to target someone else. There's also a thing called minor action. Think of them as reaction that can be performed after a player's or creature's turn is over. Every action follows a suit, and if you have a card that has the same suit as the action you want, you can use it to perform a minor action to do action out of turn, which is usually also the only way to spend them, as you can only spend one card per initiative turn. And if you draw the Fool, this time, the Fool will be aiding you, as you can use it plus any other card for any action to have another turn in the same round. Even taking damage itself is fun in a way, as you don't exactly have a set number of injury you can take. You can only take one wound directly to your body, but there are many things that can take the hit for you, like your armor, damaging them instead, or your talents, making you unable to use them, or just get staggered, which basically does nothing and act as a final hit point before something hit your body. When you finally get injured, now things get serious, because next hit will send you to the death's door, and even then, you don't die immediately, because the underworld keeps your soul tightly bound to your body. But in this world, that's bad, because you will turn into a zombie instead if nobody heal your body fast enough. In fact, if someone fucked up healing your body so badly, you will turn into zombie immediately, probably from sheer annoyance. It's honestly quite fun seeing a combat system that works completely differently than what you are used to before, because it uses an entirely different physical medium to decide the odds. It's kinda refreshing in a way. Even if you are dealt with a bad hand, you can probably still succeed by being more confident than your GM. There's just a lot of layers on this combat system, and I'm not saying that as just a pun either. And, if you got questions on how the book works, there's plenty of examples within the book to go around, and I really recommend anyone wanting to GM His Majesty the Worm to go through the Game Master section at least once. It's very well written with plenty of tips to go around, plus a pre-made dungeon if you want something to start with. And that's basically it on His Majesty the Worm, a tarot card-based dungeon crawling tabletop RPG. I heard a lot about this ttrpg before getting my hands on one, but I certainly didn't expect it to abandon dice-based mechanic and go for a tarot card one, which makes it one of the numerous reasons why I decided to review it. The other reason is obviously that I fucking love Dungeon Meshi. Go watch it if you haven't, it's good. It's like everything that happened in the show can be perfectly replicated here, including getting sick from the parasite part. I just found it very funny that there's a section on core inspiration and Dungeon Meshi is listed as the first one, and you can really see why after you read through this book. Anyway, you can get it now on itch.io, Drive-Thru RPG, or check out His Majesty the Worm main website for the hard copy on Exalted Funeral. That's all for now, and I will see you all next time. Hello there, if you like this video, please subscribe and click that notification bell button. If you want to see the videos early as well as further support my channel, you can join in my Patreon page, or buy me some coffee, links in the description. Anyway, have a nice day.